In 2015, life felt like it was crumbling around me in every possible way. My marriage, once a source of joy and comfort, was falling apart at the seams. My spouse, who had once been warm and affectionate, now seemed cold and indifferent, as if I were living with a stranger. Compounding this heartache, our young son, not yet diagnosed with autism, was a toddler who displayed behaviors that raised our concerns. Deep down, we could sense that something was not quite right with him, even if we couldn't yet put a name to our worries. By the time summer rolled around, I had made the hard decision to move my belongings into the guest quarters of our home. This space became my new bedroom, a stark reminder of how our relationship was deteriorating. It marked the beginning of the end for us, as we both lingered in a state of bitter denial, perhaps even waiting for one another to be the first to call it quits. My mornings started early, with an alarm ringing at 5 a.m. to wake me for work each weekday, and I often spent my waking hours dreaming of a way out of the grueling life of dump truck driving and construction. My spouse offered little support during this turbulent time. Financial constraints loomed large. I lacked the funds necessary to pursue a college education or the time to learn a new trade or skill that could lead me to a fulfilling career. On rare occasions, I would find some relief in creating a sketch or painting, or I'd write a poem that received a nod of appreciation from others. Yet, my talents, however heartfelt, were not sufficient to replace the steady income that my day job provided. Thus, my days consisted of exhausting 10 to 12-hour shifts behind the wheel of a tandem-axle Mack truck. My job involved hauling heavy equipment on a flatbed trailer for a paving crew, and that was the only way I could manage to cover our mortgage and pay the bills. The second Friday of June arrived, seemingly just like any other day. It was payday, and my plans were simple. I hoped to spend quality time with my little one, tuck him into bed, and unwind with a cheap bottle of whiskey before drifting off to sleep in the guest room. For now, I was still on the clock, preparing for what would be my last run of the day. My foreman, Mike, approached me with a special favor. He needed me to transport an overloaded flatbed down the road a few miles. Under normal circumstances, I would have declined, but I respected Mike and felt that a disagreement would only add to my stress. With a weary resolve, I agreed, thinking the worst I could face was a fine from a Department of Transportation officer for the overloaded cargo. As the crew readied a paver, a skid steer, and a roller on the flatbed, much more than it was designed to carry, I surveyed the situation. Everything was secured with chains, and I assured the workers that I would catch up with them in the yard after I hooked up to the trailer. I eased off the clutch and shifted into first gear, immediately feeling the resistance and struggle of the Mack as I attempted to pull the heavily laden trailer. I reached the first traffic light without incident, thanks to my diligence in downshifting and braking in advance. However, in the midst of my focus, I noticed my seatbelt was undone. I struggled to secure it, but it wouldn't budge. Just then, the light turned green, and the sky opened up, unleashing a torrential downpour. I began driving cautiously, keeping my speed 10 miles per hour below the posted limit, convinced that this would help ensure my safety. As I passed a quarry on my left, I navigated a steep descent toward my destination. Partway down, I noticed traffic was halted ahead in the distance. I applied the brakes gently, but to my horror, the truck's tires began to skid on the slick road surface. The trailer started to jackknife dangerously, veering over the double yellow lines toward oncoming traffic. I instinctively eased off the brakes to regain control, but when I reapplied them, the same skidding occurred. All the while, I continued to careen toward the stopped vehicles ahead while traveling downhill at 30 miles per hour, with a weight exceeding 60,000 pounds looming behind me. The narrow country road offered no safety net, one lane for downhill traffic, another for uphill, flanked by dense trees on either side. In a desperate bid to halt the impending disaster, I pulled the parking brake and began to pump the brake pedal repeatedly. The thought of crashing in a commercial truck, with its high chances of fatal consequences for the driver, rushed through my mind. The added worry of not being buckled in only heightened my anxiety. The vehicles ahead were now perilously close, just mere tractor-trailer lengths away, and I realized with growing fear that I was unable to stop the truck. In those terrifying moments, my thoughts turned to my wife, and I recalled simpler times when love was the foundation of our relationship before resentment crept in. I thought about my son and the life he deserved, and my heart ached for the drivers and passengers in the cars ahead and their families. The stark realization hit me, it would be utterly tragic to lose my life in a crash, especially in a dump truck, colliding into the unforgiving trees lining the road. A collision was unavoidable, and I was determined to do everything possible to prevent innocent motorists from losing their lives. My last trip had turned into a reckless escapade. As someone who did not believe in a higher power, I found myself wondering if there might be some kind of spirit or guardian hidden in the nearby woods, watching over those like me, truckers and bikers alike. With a surge of desperation, I called out to this unseen force. "Make it quick!" That was my first and last prayer to whatever spirit might dwell in that forest. Deep down, I had no illusions about surviving what I was about to do. I didn't want to suffer in pain after the crash, I just wanted my inevitable end to be swift and merciful. Without hesitation, I turned the steering wheel away from the bustling traffic and into the thick trees. The moment the front wheels left the pavement, the truck jolted violently, and I was thrown around like a rag doll. The bumpy, uneven terrain shook me brutally, sending waves of pain crashing through my body unlike anything I had ever felt. As a troubled teenager, I had faced violence before, beatings with chains, relentless assaults, and the cruel mistreatment from my father during my childhood. But none of that prepared me for the punishing impact of every bump as I careened through the forest. The trailer separated from the truck, veering off to another part of the woods while the cab roared on, dragging me along as a reluctant passenger. The truck tore through the underbrush, mercilessly trampling vegetation, leaving behind shredded bits of metal, and battling against the branches of trees that tried to fight off this unwelcome assault. I clung to the steering wheel with everything I had, my heart racing as I slammed my hands against the dashboard, the control panel, and the shifter, feeling every jagged edge dig into my skin. Then came a moment that felt like a scene from a nightmare. The truck hit a massive bump, and I soared headfirst into the ceiling. Blood exploded everywhere, staining the interior. Just as suddenly, the vehicle hit a dip and skidded to an abrupt stop, pinning me in my seat with a crushing pressure on my chest. It felt like a heart attack. Somehow, despite everything, I remained inside the cab, not flying through the glass, as the chaos finally came to an end. The painful pressure in my chest released as quickly as it had come, leaving me gasping for breath. I stumbled out of the wreckage that had once been a robust Mack truck. I was drenched in blood, and something that looked like a grocery bag seemed stuck to my head. It wasn't just a bag, I didn't realize in that moment that I had suffered a severe scalp injury, which had peeled back my skin, leaving my skull exposed and blood pouring down my face. My scalp hung off the side of my head, much like the peel of a fruit after being taken apart. This gruesome realization hit me hard as I thought about how it must have happened when I collided with the truck's ceiling. Yet, even amidst the agony, the most intense pain was in my chest. I ruled out the steering wheel as the culprit, it wasn't a heart attack. I was left bewildered about what had slammed into my sternum with such ferocity. All that mattered, however, was my unwelcome survival. Moments later, paramedics arrived, fitting me with a C-collar and strapping me down on a backboard to load me into an ambulance. My favorite punk rock shirt, featuring Blitz, was soaked in my blood and ripped away by the medical team. They took my vitals and bombarded me with questions to check my level of consciousness. Suddenly, there was a brief silence as they exchanged glances. "Am I gonna make it?" I joked, turning my head to see both medics staring at my chest, their mouths hanging open and eyes wide in shock. After a tense pause, they reassured me that everything would be fine and continued their routine checks during the ride to the hospital. In the hospital, I lay there thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The doctors administered pain relief, stitched up my scalp, bandaged it, and settled me into a room. I reflected on my poor choices, the impulsive decision I had made, the desperate prayer I had uttered, and that crushing blow to my chest as I crashed, somehow avoiding being thrown through the windshield. As I stood in the hospital room, bare-chested and facing a mirror, I couldn't help but stare at the bruise that now marked my skin. A deep purple impression, shaped eerily like a giant hand, stretched across my chest, measuring about a foot in length. It was a haunting reminder of the nightmarish turn my life had taken in a matter of seconds.